What makes the achievement of emotional sobriety so difficult is the habits we have, the patterns we have in our behavior, the habitual ways that we've come to think about things. We have to really become aware of those things in order to challenge them, because the consciousness that has created a lot of the problems in our life cannot solve it, cannot change things. So what happens is the first step is waking up. Well, tonight, I'm going to be passing the baton over here to Roger. He's going to lead us in discussing step number 6. We're entirely ready to have God remove all these defects of character. So Roger, come and join me in here, and I'll turn the meeting over to you tonight.
All right. Brian, were you laying down the gauntlet to Declan there at this? Well, we'll talk about that later. So thanks, Alan. I appreciate the opportunity to kick things off tonight. And hello to everyone. I know we have participants from all over the world, not just all over the country. So welcome, everyone. So how does step 6 help us grow our self-esteem? Remember, step 6 is we're entirely ready to have God remove these defects of character. Bill Wilson wrote in the 12 and 12 that step 6 is, quote, AA's way of stating the best possible attitude one can take in order to make a beginning of this lifetime job, removing character defects or unhealthy coping strategies, as we sometimes call them. This does not mean that we expect all our character defects to be lifted out of us as our drive to drink was. A few of them may be, but with most of them, we shall have to be content with patient improvement. Later, he wrote, the only urgent thing is that we make a beginning and keep trying. The same is true for the lifetime job of building our self-esteem, isn't it? It's an incremental process requiring persistence, commitment, and a strong sense of purpose, just as step 6 does. From my point of view, the process of doing step 6 is the process of strengthening my integrity, is the process of acting purposefully, acting with a goal clearly stated in step 6, the removal of our character defects. Step 6 is the expansion of my consciousness, living more consciously, is taking responsibility for my actions and words, for my happiness, and so on. Bill goes on to point out in the 12 and 12 that we exalt, and I like his use of that word because it's certainly true for me. We exalt in some of our defects. We really love them, he says. These defects or coping strategies, or I like to call them instincts gone wild, unquote, can serve several functions. Some are intended in part to make us feel good physically and emotionally, at least in the moment. Gluttony, lust, and greed are 3 of them that come to mind. They are intended to protect our ego with a capital E and make us feel powerful and admired, but also to protect us from experiencing the pain of life, from feeling the vulnerability and the fear that life brings. Our defects also protect our self-image and our image in the mind of others as we fantasize about it, as we imagine it is. They distract us from the feeling that we're unworthy of love or unworthy of happiness, or they distract us from the pain of loss. Bill gives us examples of the defects we exalt in, such as our desire to feel superior to others, and goes on to mention self-righteous anger, which is still one of my favorites and has been much of my life, greed, lust, gluttony, and sloth. Obviously, a man familiar with the 7 deadly sins, right? Nathaniel Branden, in the 6 Pillars of Self-Esteem, also writes about how we resort to strategies, like feeling superior to others, as a way to create an artificial sense of self-esteem, or pseudo self-esteem, he calls it, that isn't built primarily from the inside out, as genuine self-esteem is, but instead is an effort to create good feelings about oneself from the outside in. In his chapter on the illusion of self-esteem, Branden writes, sometimes we see people who enjoy worldly success, are widely esteemed, or who have a public veneer of assurance, and yet are deeply dissatisfied, anxious, or depressed. They may project the appearance of self-efficacy, which means effectiveness or confidence, and self-respect. They may have the persona of self-esteem, but not possess the reality. He continues, nothing is more common than to pursue self-esteem by means that will not and cannot work. Mm. I want to say that again, because that really made an impression on me when I was reading it. Because man, I've worked that one to death. Nothing is more common than to pursue self-esteem by means that will not and cannot work. Instead of seeking self-esteem through consciousness, responsibility, and integrity, we may seek it through popularity or material acquisitions, gluttony, and sexual exploits, lust. Here's the similarity between these methods we use to create a false sense of self-esteem, and what Bill writes about in the 12 and 12 in our character defects. Instead of valuing, he continues, instead of valuing personal authenticity, we may value belonging to the right clubs or the right church or the right political party or the right fill in the blank, right? He mentions that instead of seeking to increase our positive, healthy sense of power and competence by developing and utilizing our talents and abilities, we may pursue power by manipulating and controlling others. We talk about that a lot when we're talking about emotional sobriety and emotional dependency, right? The possibilities for self-deception, he writes, are almost endless. All the blind alleys down which we can lose ourselves, not really realizing that what we desire cannot be purchased with counterfeit currency. Yet, I would add, is not the very pursuit of these blind alleys, these false gods and these character defects that govern our choices, part of the learning process for all of us. Lastly, he says, self-esteem is an intimate experience. It resides in the core of one's being. It is what I think and feel about myself, not what someone else thinks or feels about me. Which is not to say that other people do not or should not have any influence, positively or negatively, on our self-esteem, but that it primarily needs to come from within ourselves. So more specifically, how does step 6, being entirely ready to have God remove our character defects and our imperfections, improve our self-esteem? At the risk of sounding like a broken record, from my point of view, every one of Branden's 7 pillars, if we include willingness of self-esteem, is positively impacted and connected to working step 6. We've already given considerable attention to the ways the first 5 steps help us grow in our ability to live more consciously and become more self-accepting and grow in self-responsibility, which are the first 3 of Branden's pillars of self-esteem. So in my limited time tonight, I want to touch on 2 self-esteem pillars that we haven't talked about much: the practice of personal integrity and the practice of living purposefully. One of the things step 6 is asking us to look at is how well our words and actions line up with our values, or at least with the values we aspire to, the values or virtues that reflect who we most deeply want to be. Step 6 asks us to be entirely ready, not a little bit ready, not moderately ready, entirely ready to have God, our higher power, or if you wish, reality and our alignment or surrender to it, to clean up those flaws, those words and actions that damage and limit our psychological and spiritual well-being, and to cultivate behaviors we believe reflect our true values. This concern with aligning our words and our behavior with our values is precisely what the pillar of personal integrity focuses on. Regarding this practice, Branden writes, as we mature and develop our own standards and values, the issue of personal integrity assumes increasing importance in our self-acceptance, meaning in our self-esteem. In other words, as we differentiate more and more, the issue of our personal integrity becomes more important to us. Integrity, he writes, is the integration of ideals, convictions, standards, and beliefs with our behavior, with our actions. It's walking and talking our beliefs, our values, and convictions. When our behavior is congruent with our professed values, when ideals and practice match, we have integrity. Another way to talk about integrity that Alan and I subscribe to is to talk about integrity as wholeness or as integration, the state of being whole and undivided. Branden continues, observe that before the issue of integrity can even be raised, we need principles of behavior, moral convictions about what is and is not appropriate, judgments about right and wrong action. And those are very much implicit in step 6, right? I've identified what I regard as my unhealthy coping skills, as my character flaws or defects, and I want to reduce or eliminate those. One of the tools Branden uses extensively in his clinical practice and his books to help bring deepened and expanded awareness to the practices that build self-esteem is the sentence completion technique. And I want to take a minute to talk about that method. Branden believed that we know much more than we think we know about our problems, our motives and intentions, the functions of our behaviors, no matter how dysfunctional they may be, and the positive possibilities for solutions to those problems. But that our psychological defenses can prevent us from accessing that knowledge, that awareness. So that knowledge and awareness are largely subconscious to us rather than conscious. He did not invent the sentence completion technique, but he developed such expertise with it that he turned it into a fine art, and it was actually his primary therapeutic technique. He used it to help his clients and readers, because he also uses it in his books, gain access to that hidden knowledge that is typically outside the range of our conscious awareness. In his books, he urges the readers to write 6 to 10 short endings to each sentence stem, writing whatever comes immediately to mind, unfiltered and uncensored. Notice in the examples I'm about to give that he approaches personal growth in this pillar, as he does in all pillars, in small steps, rather than asking us to take big leaps forward. As Bill talked about in the 12 and 12, we need to focus on patience and consistent, sustained progress, not perfection, in overcoming our character defects. And it's very much a lifelong project. The same is true with raising our level of integrity. A few examples of these sentence completions or incomplete sentence are: I support my integrity when I undermine my integrity when I. And let me give a couple of endings that might come up. Again, the idea with these is to write down a short ending and the first thing that comes to mind. Doesn't need to be true, doesn't need to sound brilliant. The idea with writing the first thing to come to mind is what? It bypasses a lot of our psychological defenses. Our need to sound brilliant, our need to, even to ourselves, right? Our need to look good, right, in our own mind. Our need to reveal deep truths, and so on and so on. I support my integrity when I make sure that I tell the truth when somebody asks me a question, unless I have a damn good reason not to. I support my integrity when I make sure that I'm honest in terms of being in touch with my feelings and talking about what's going on with myself emotionally. I support my integrity when I am tempted to lie and tell the truth anyway. I support my integrity when I blank is a perfectly good answer, by the way. Often in my work with clients, that'll be the answer they give. So that's my answer to that one. I undermine my integrity when I hide from truth. I undermine my integrity when I'm afraid to reveal myself. I undermine my integrity when, and so on and so on. Another one that emphasizes the incremental nature of working with our pillars of self-esteem is, if I bring 5% more integrity into my life, I would. If I bring 5% more integrity into my relationships, I would what? I would take what action? I would say what words? Some other examples related to integrity are, if I think about going against my parents' wishes, I feel. When I behave with greater integrity, I'm aware. The scary or difficult thing about behaving with integrity is an example of when I've maintained my integrity and also showed concern for others. Because we can get this idea that there needs to be a split. Either I maintain my integrity and I'm true to me, or I'm concerned with you. So this one tries to get at an example of when I've maintained my integrity and also showed concern for others is, and the last one I threw in, if I really listened to the endings I've been writing, I would, right? Or if there's any truth to the endings I've been writing, I might. So as we write these endings, again, if we're doing it in written form rather than orally, he recommends 6 to 10 different endings for each root, and then going on to the next root, and just doing a few of these roots, sentence stems or roots at a time, maybe 4, maybe 5. All kinds of material, as you might imagine, begins to bubble up inside of us. All kinds of answers. I've had clients come in and go, why do I behave this way? I got no idea why I do this. I know better. And I'll give them the sentence roots. One of the reasons I continue doing this, even though I know better, right? And they'll generate 6 or 8 endings and they'll go, oh my God, I know a lot about why I continue to do this. And I go, I know, it's amazing, isn't it? How much more we know than we think we know. I believe Tom has posted most of the sentences examples I just gave, but in Branden's book, with regard to every one of the pillars at the end of each chapter, both in how to raise your self-esteem and especially in the 6 pillars of self-esteem, he gives many, many examples that he asks the reader to work with of the use of this sentence completion technique. Another of the practices that step 6 directly connects with and supports is the practice of living purposefully. In step 6, I am committing myself to the conscious purpose of making myself ready to have my flaws and my imperfections removed, declaring my willingness to let them go little by little, flaw by flaw. An example in introducing the concept of living more purposefully that Branden writes about is this. He was sitting one evening having dinner with a close friend. That close friend happened to have been divorced a couple of times. And the friend said to Nathaniel, God, I hope I handle things right with this time, with a woman that he had just formed a strong connection with and was very hopeful for his future with. I really hope I handle things right this time. I want this relationship to succeed so much. I hope, that I just don't screw it up. I just listened silently, wrote Nathaniel. Do you have any advice, his friend asked? Well, yes, I do, he said. If you want this relationship to work, make it your conscious purpose that it work. Let go of this language about I wish, I hope, I really, really want, Think about what you know from other relationships you've been in. Think about what you've learned. Think about what it takes to make this relationship work better in terms of communication, in terms of your connection with your partner and with yourself. Make it your conscious purpose to make this relationship work. And that's an example that he does bring in to kick off the chapter on the practice of living purposefully. Notice he's not talking about my life purpose. There's a place and a time for talking about that too. But when he's talking about living purposefully, he's talking about it in a much more concrete, much more specific and detailed sense. To live without purpose, he goes on to say, when he's writing about it later in the chapter, is to live life at the mercy of chance, the chance event, the chance phone call, the chance encounter, because we have no standard by which to judge what is or is not worth doing. Outside forces bounce us along like a cork floating on water with no initiative of our own that sets a specific course. Our orientation to life is reactive rather than proactive. We are drifters. And I've spent a lot of time drifting. Of all the pillars, this might be the most problematic one for me, the one I struggle with the most, because I like to go with the flow, right? And there's a time and a place for that as well. But there's also a time for a clear sense of purpose and goal directedness. To live purposefully is to use our powers for the attainment of goals that we have selected. 2 more thoughts. We build our sense of fundamental efficacy, and remember that's one of his 2 core pieces of self-esteem: self-confidence or efficacy, and self-respect. We build our sense of fundamental efficacy, that is a general confidence in our ability to deal with life, through the mastery of specific forms of efficacy, of specific challenges, specific skills, specific things we learn. The last example I'll give, and then I'll wrap up. Another example he gives is his wife at the time was talking with him about the virtue of kindness, right? Because she was, and I knew her, and she was a very kind, very considerate woman. And so she said to Nathaniel that he can be generous and caring and very kind. She said, you can be that way when you stop long enough in what you're doing for it to occur to you. And Nathaniel had to acknowledge that that was right, that he had a tendency to get preoccupied and not show the level of compassion or kindness necessarily toward other people, not through intent, but just because he had his mind on something else. So he had to acknowledge that she was right about that he would sometimes behave discourteously or unkindly toward other people without necessarily meaning to. She said, what you've never really thought about, Nathaniel, is the discipline of kindness. You've never made kindness a conscious purpose, a conscious goal for yourself. You've never treated kindness as a basic way of functioning in your life. It's in you as a potential, but it doesn't happen without consciousness and without discipline and focus. So he thought about that and decided that it's right. And he noted that kindness as an inclination, in his experience of it, is very different than kindness as something that he's committed to, that he's chosen as a purpose. So on that note, giving a little attention tonight to, functioning with greater integrity and functioning with a greater sense of purpose, I'll turn it over to my colleagues here.
Well, my first response is, wow. Fantastic job, Raj. I mean, you are really, somebody asked me, hey, has the format in this meeting changed? It seems like more of a lecture. I says, it is. I says, it is. And it's a wonderful lecture. And you're our resident expert on self-esteem here, and your insights and your ability to integrate it with this step is just, is fantastic. I'm sitting here learning a lot, and I hope everybody else is learning a lot from you as well. We'll go ahead and jump in and share some of our comments. We'll try to keep it short and leave a little room for some people to share, because you said so many things that are so important. But let me turn it over to Herb and then Tom, and then I'll be the cleanup batter again tonight.
All right, thanks a lot. A lot of the times I'm on Zoom, I use a small pad. Whenever Roger gets on the Zoom, I use a large pad.
Absolutely.
He's definitely an overachiever. It's wonderful. It's rich and full. I really appreciate it. And actually, I got really lots of information and insight, but the one that was so important to me, obviously it's about me, is that it explained to me the effectiveness of the material I use in my step 4 workshop, which is equivalent to sentence completion. I never thought of it that way. Yeah. But I asked them to ask themselves questions with prompters, very focused, and most everybody has a phenomenal experience with it, coming to grips with things they never saw before. So that explains it. And Dr. Berger has exposed me a lot to sentence completion, as well as the empty chair, which I all hate. But anyway, he remembers my resistance. The thing that struck me is, I'm so aware that I was so externally oriented for everything. And as a result of doing this work and the therapy supplement to all of that, I've become very inner driven, that the outside of me hardly has much of emotion at all. people, circumstances, events, standards. Sometimes I'm a pain in the ass because of it, but in the iconoclast standpoint, but I like to break statues in the sense of waking people up. So that's one thought I had. The other was the term kindness. Somebody gave me a book for good reason. Loving Kindness by Rami Shapiro. He's a rabbi who is a 12-step person and is very acquainted with the whole Buddhist philosophy and stuff, and he's incorporated it into a book with the title Loving Kindness, and it's very worthwhile reading. It's not as sophisticated, but it's a good reminder of having the intention from a purpose standpoint of loving kindness, and that's sort of a mantra from the Buddhist tradition. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
When I was thinking about this section on living more purposefully, you came to mind often, Herb, in terms of intention, which is another way, or at least intimately connected with purpose, right? And I wanted to use those examples about his friend who was interested in this woman and not wanting to mess it up, or the issue of kindness, because we think of purposefulness and goals a lot with regard to work, right? And with regard to career and all of that stuff. But he makes a strong point that it's every bit as applicable to personal life and personal relationships as well. Yet most of us don't necessarily think about it that way.
The business of living.
Yeah, the business of living. Very good. Tom.
Yeah, it's well, first of all, I want to say for Herb, in terms of hating the empty chair, is I was telling a story earlier today that about a fellow I had in my office one time, and he was a lawyer, very left brain guy, and dealing with an eating disorder. And I get those chairs. I have lots of chairs because I have my therapist said to me one time, there's nothing wrong with you, Tom, that a little bit more furniture won't help. and so I have lots of chairs, but I also am very respectful of being flexible when people don't want to do that stuff. And he didn't want to do that. So for several sessions I didn't do it. But in one session, I just had that pesky, muse in my head that just said, put the chair out, put the chair out, put the chair out. And it was almost like I was going, leave me alone, man. I'm trying to work here. It's like, but I finally put it out. I'll just tell you the brief version of it. This was a beautiful moment, but it was also hilarious. Is this guy, I put the chair out and it just said, okay, that's Ed. And no, I didn't even say anything. I just put the chair out at that point. And he's looking down and he sits there for many seconds. And then he says, this is really embarrassing. I'm having difficulty having eye contact with that chair. And it was perfect because, if you want to know this stuff is real, just do that. And it's like, it becomes real.
Yes.
So my piece about this, I have so many notes here, Roger, from what you said. Alan said, "Wow." Mine was "damn," and that's a two-syllable. It's a Texas two-syllable "damn." It's a particular thing. But I'm just going to do this. I'm going to say to me, and I'm going to give a brief examples of how step 6 that happened to me today. Step 6 is becoming entirely ready, is stepping through the threshold into adulthood, into the part where I am the person who takes care, is responsible for myself. And I really appreciated, Roger, you talking about the parts about making something a purpose. In our language of, I hope something works out. I hope this works out. I hope it gets better. Because I'm a damn English major, and I'm always just saying, anytime people use the it pronoun, I'm saying what? I hope it's better. Later, like what's better? It's like, because people step out and they say stuff like, I wonder what I'm supposed to learn. Like according to whom? It's like, what the heck? It's like we're guessing to see if we can get the answers that are in the back of the book that we'll get to see one day. It's like, instead of and I'm not trying to step on anybody's belief systems, but it's like, I just believe it's more powerful to say, what can I learn from this situation? What can I learn? And, and in terms of, I hope it works out better. I'm determined, like you were talking about with the relationship, I am determined to make this work. I am committed to it. And, so, okay, I'm just going to say this to be brief. I had three main bullet points for this about just what stepping through the threshold step 6 has been for me. It's the older I get, the more simple things become. There's just no doubt about it. Things are just simple. They're offensively simple sometimes. 1, living fully in the present moment. I finally figured out that that's not just a wonderful concept that I should ponder, but it is actually a practice that is quite easy to do when I do it. It's being in the present moment. All I have to do is narrate my movements, and I am in the present moment. The second bullet point, that my job, you said we do this with work. I got this mostly from Marcus Aurelius and Stoicism. My job every day is to be the best version of myself, period. That's, that'll include all other responsibilities in that. That's my job. And my job is to practice radical honesty with myself and with others. And that doesn't mean with all others. It means with people I choose to share with. And I had this one experience that I definitely can fit into step 6 today in therapy, where a woman I've known for a long time was talking about her husband, who is quite verbally abusive and emotionally abusive, and he's and I believe he's an alcoholic. It's and I was saying to her, that's cruel. I was giving, she's giving her I said, so that's beyond just being mean. That's cruel. And in that moment, I became entirely ready to be aware of my defects of character. In that moment, the moment I said that word, I went back and I had looked at this in various ways, and I've many times since I've been sober, but all of a sudden I had a deeper understanding of how cruel I was as in my drinking days. I mean, it was almost stopped me in my tracks, and I'm glad I was happy that I knew this woman very well, because I just stopped and I shared a little bit with her, just that's why I was hesitating. And but it was freeing instead of depressing, and instead of, oh my God, let me look at what a horrible piece of shit I was again. It's like it was just going that and I was judging this man until that moment, when I all of a sudden was aware of that he is no more cruel right now than I ever was, so I want to say that, and that was powerful for me. So I want to share that because it's a support group, and I just needed to share it. So
Thank you, Tom.
thanks.
Thank you.
Very nice. Very nice. There's so many parts of what you were saying, Roger, that is so important. And, it's very interesting that he treats purpose in a very different way than, let's say, Dr. Viktor Frankl treats purpose.
Mm-hmm.
Dr. Frankl looks at it from so much more of a global position, right? In how to have meaning in my life. And Nathaniel and you really, differentiated that difference, or just, made that difference very clear about he's much more concerned with it being grounded in what we're doing, in being focused on what we're doing to increase our self-efficacy, is to really give a focus to our activities, to our energy, to achieving some goals in our life that are going to add to that sense of, that I have this self-efficacy. I'm a competent individual. I can go ahead and take on some things and master these issues in my life. And it's a very important thing, and they're both important. It's not that Viktor Frankl stuff. It's not either or, it's and, right? They're both very important things. And we're going to see that. And I often add that definition of purpose to self-esteem, not just Branden's, but Dr. Frankl's. I do believe that the other one that you were talking about is as important for us, is to keep a sense. I've seen that in your life, Herb, is the purpose you have in your life is giving back all that you've learned. And it has just filled your heart and your soul. And I mean, it's just wonderful to watch that blossom inside of your spirit. And that's what has happened. The thing I wanted to pick up today just briefly, and I'll go into this more when I have my shot at this, is this focusing on the outside in. See, that's what the Fritz Perls calls it, that at some point in our development, we decided to dedicate ourselves to actualize a concept of who we should be rather than to actualize ourselves. And see, that's the false self. That's where our separation from ourselves started so early on. And when we start to now tie step 6 with step 5, and talk about the exact nature of our wrongs. Well, when I abandon myself for an idea of who I should be, rather than to honor myself and accept myself as I am, my talk about pseudo self-esteem. And now it was all about polishing up this idea. So you would think it's so shiny and bright and wonderful. And you just say, oh my God, I'd like to have that. But God, if what did Tom Rutledge say? Look underneath the hood.
Yeah.
It's not 8 cylinders, it's 4. Buddy, you got an old Volkswagen engine in there.
Where's the engine? Where's the engine?
It's not the high horsepower Maserati that you're acting like it is. It's so, but the relief of this is also tremendous.
Yeah.
Is that when we start to let some of these things go and realize I don't have to be what I thought I should be all these years to be okay. This is where this ties into emotional sobriety. The freedom from letting go of some of this stuff is just profound. I mean, if you were in the study group beforehand, Herb, got that picture of that guy holding those bars up and thinking, look, everybody and everything has imprisoned me in this prison. And then he backs off and zooms out a little bit. And it's a guy standing in the middle of the desert, holding up these bars and telling everybody, let me out, and like, drop the bars, buddy. What do we say in the program? Drop the rock. Drop the rock. This is the beginning of dropping the rock. Step 6 is the beginning of us dropping the rock so that we can start to experience this freedom. And so I just wanted to tie it back into emotional sobriety.
I hear a lot of people criticize the 12 steps, that they're old-fashioned. I can understand that criticism. They were written back in 1935. Some people that are agnostic have difficulty with the word God used in the steps. For me, I look at the process that's involved, the forces that the 12 steps generate are so powerful that I think they're ageless. There's this interesting phenomena that happens when you work the steps. They create a charge and then a discharge. The first step, we're powerless. Our life has become unmanageable. It creates this charge. We're in big trouble and we don't know what to do. And then step 2 comes along and it says we have hope. That charge, that existential crisis that we have is resolved. What's happening here is parallel to life. We charge ourselves when we breathe in. When we exhale, we discharge. That's the rhythm of life. And the way I love to think about the 12 steps, it's helping us get connected to the rhythm of life so we can learn how to show up in a good way.